Hello, good afternoon, class. I am Miss Carmela Strasas. You can call me Mom Carms, and I will be your teacher for today's lesson. This is SHS 212 Literature class. This is literature, and I would really love to discuss this class with you. However, unfortunately, naaptan gyud ta og Holy Week, no? So, to give you a discussion about our lesson, I hope this recorded video will provide sufficient information for your learning. Okay, let's begin. Dili na nato siya padugayon, no? This week's lesson will be about Latin American literature. Diba? Previously, you have discussed about the literature of the world, European literature, the prominent authors, their most acclaimed works. They have been introduced to you and discussed to you as well. Since this is literature, I do hope that we can share the passion to unveil stories and works told to numerous generations. I hope that by the end of this lesson, dili sakit sa ulo ang inyong magain ha or ang makuha, but you will look at perspectives in a manner that varies in every period. Okay? In my literature class, I always inculcate that you find not just the creativity, but you find life in every literary world work. Kasi pag literature, lalo na sa class ko, we will not only unravel authors' backgrounds, their literary works, but we will go on a journey of shared experiences and unveiling feelings. Okay? Sige, ma'am, magsugod na ta. Sige ka og istorya, ma'am. Okay? Let's begin with first defining what is Latin American literature. Okay, first, our content. We have here an overview or definition of Latin American literature. We have here the periods of Latin American literature, the themes of Latin American literature, and then the prominent writers, who are the prominent writers, and their literary pieces as well. For lesson objectives, at the end of this lesson, you are expected to identify representative texts and authors from Latin America. You are to exhibit concrete understanding of the periods and literary texts in Latin American literature through recitation. And then you are to create a reflection paper based on a given literary text. Ayan, interesting. Creating a reflection paper based on a given literary text. Sige daw, ma'am. Okay, let's have first an overview. What is Latin American literature? And siya. When you say Latin American literature, it consists of oral and written literature in several languages. We have here Spanish, Portuguese, indigenous languages of the Americans, as well as literature of the United States written in the Spanish language. It rose to particular prominence globally during the second half of the 20th century, largely due to the international success of the style known as magical realism. Ma'am, unsa na magical realism, ma'am? Okay, sige. Hold on for that thought for a while kasi later on the themes of the Latin American literature, we're going to find out unsa nang magical realism or how important it is o ngano siya na-inculcate sa Latin American literature. Okay, first, pag sinabi mong Latin American literature, these are works written and orally transmitted by authors in North America, South America, and the parts in Caribbean. Usually, it's written in Spanish, Portuguese, English, or any language native to their specific country or region. Sige. Ma'am, question. Nga naman siya gitawag, ma'am, na Latin American literature, ma'am? Sige daw, nga doon gitawag natin Latin American literature? Okay, fact check tayo. It is because Latin America consists of countries like Mexico, Caribbean, Central and South America, which shares the language mostly on Spanish and Portuguese. Sige, both language, the Spanish, and Portuguese, these are classified as Romance languages, which are derived from Latin. Hence, it is coined Latin America. Okay, Spanish and Portuguese. So in other words, literature from countries speaking Spanish and Portuguese in Western Hemisphere, that is Latin American literature. Okay? Dili kayo mabalaka unsa ng realism katong gingon ka ganiha like magical realism kasi later on we will tackle it sa mga themes na naa sa Latin American literature. Okay? Ano nga yun? Pag sinabing Latin American literature, these are literature written mostly in Spanish and Portuguese, usually in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, ayan. Okay. Before we proceed no sa mga themes, katong gi-state na ako kaganiha, or gi-mention like the magical realism, let us have first the history and the periods present in Latin America. Kasi like other literatures, before we derived on the contemporary literature, these literatures exhibit growth and development captured in every period. So in every period is na naka-specify na mga development na nahitabo, okay? That's why naapoy improvement when it comes to literature. So let's find out first what are the periods which contributed to the development and history of Latin American literature. Okay, first period we have here is pre-Columbian literature. Ma'am, what's the pre-Columbian literature, ma'am? Okay, the literature during this time is primarily oral through the Aztecs and Mayans colonial literature. Okay, when you say pre-Columbian literature, this period is technically marked by oral traditions of these civilizations. Their literature centers on agriculture, mythology, astronomy, political history, and religion. Kasi during this time, people give accounts of their literature through oral traditions. Okay, orally nila ginahatag. Walay written, walay anything that is written. So oral yun siya tanan. Those people works at the beginning of oral tradition with context varying from stories or experiences to stories of beliefs and mythologies to stories and fantasies. So they relay their information, they relay their literature orally. Okay? That's pre-Columbian literature. Okay. When we say again pre-Columbian literature, or that is, it simply means before colonization. So ang keyword na ato ang dumduman when we say pre-Columbian literature, that is oral tradition. So pag sinabi ng teacher nga which part or which period of the Latin American literature centers on oral tradition, ang answer dito is pre-Columbian literature. Okay. Next period we have here colonial literature. When Europeans encountered the New World, early explorers and conquistadores produced written accounts and chronicles of their experiences, such as Columbus' letters or Bernal Diaz del Castillo's description of the conquest of Mexico. So, after the oral tradition, the period shifted due to the beginning of colonization. The people in this period, they gained their own forms of artistic verbal expression. So, i-improve sila or ilahang expression from solely oral or plain oral stories to nahimo na siyang prayers, na anay chants, na anay hymns, na anay myths, tapos na po yung various theaters na nag root after atong verbal or oral tradition, which is from pre-Columbian literature. Okay, the first ever European poetry to be heard in the New World are those ballads sung by Columbus sailors during their voyage. These times kasi dominant ang during this time kasi the colonial literature, from the word colonial itself, colonization, is dominant ang invasion or colonization, and they spend most of their time on the vast ocean. Kasi nga, during those times, ang mga colonizers natin, ang ginagamit nila nga mode of transportation is through the ocean lang man siya. So, naga-boat sila. Or naga-ship sila. Tapos ilahang ginagamit na route of transportation nila is ang ocean. So, the explorers, they discovered a way to elevate or to entertain themselves. That's when additions of verbal expressions are utilized. So, muto nga, instead na oral traditions na siya, they're plainly telling your story to the people, it became a chant, nanay hymns, nanay prayers, like that. Na siya, nasagula na siya og another meter or another sound na pwede ma-inculcate sa imong poetry or literature. Okay? Pag sinabing colonial literature, improvement na siya, or the shifting from oral tradition to an improvement in their verbal expression. Addition to verbal expressions. Okay? The third period here, we have 19th century literature. It is also known as foundational fictions. The novels in the Romantic or Naturalist traditions that attempted to establish a sense of national identity and which often focus on the indigenous question or the dichotomy of civilization or barbarism. Ma'am, nga nung gitawag man siya, ma'am, na foundational fiction. Okay, it is called foundational fiction because during this period, writers attempted to establish a sense of national identity. Meaning, the 19th century literature, mostly, ang mga authors or mga writers here is nahimong foundation nila ang sense of national identity. They use this period where they showcase their identity as a nation. Okay? Next, we have here the indigenous question or the dichotomy or the separation but the contrasting element of civilization or barbarism. It increases also the women's education and writing during the 19th century brought more women writers to the forefront. Diba? Kasi during the past, it is thought that men are more valuable than women. Diba? During those periods, mas important para sa ilaha ang mga lalaki compared sa babae. So they pay more close attention to men than that of women. Tungod kay na may stereotyping, like stereotyping sa una kay pagkababae ka, you are pagkababae ka na lang ka sa balay, pagkababae ka, you are stripped of your right to education. Diba? Kay ang education sa una is only enjoyed by men. However, during this period, slowly nag-rise na ang women, so no, girl power na kayo, no, or women empowerment na kaayo. It places a halt on the practice na ang mga women is dapat dili mo enjoy sa same right na ma-experience sa men, especially in education. So slowly, ang mga writers is nagkadungag na pud ang mga women nga nagasulat during this period. Okay? 19th century literature. Fourth, we have here Modernismo and boom precursor. Again siya naman ito. Began at the late 19th century. So it's a poetic movement whose founding text was the Nicaraguan Ruben Darro's Azul. Sige, ang Azul is a collection of short stories and poetry written by Ruben Dario. Okay? It is a collection of short stories written due to his journey or his travels from one place to another. Ruben Dario is also known for his experiments on poetic rhythm, meter, imagery, and is also considered as the father of modernism movement. And see Ruben Dario. He's in a renovation of poetic form and techniques extending to the use of free verse. Because of Ruben Dario's innovation or renovation towards his work or poetry, dito na nabuo ang free verse. Di ba kay, when we write poetry, naamay verse ng mga poems, like naa siya meters, naa siya rhythm na ginashow. But in Robert Dario, dito nabuo ang free verse. Okay? It's also the first Latin American literary movement to influence literary culture outside of the region and was also the first truly Latin American literature. It is considered as the first truly Latin American literature. That is because si Ruben Dario kasi he travels from one place to another. And during these travels, he introduces slowly his written works to the people or to the global community. That is why it became a primary influence towards the culture outside of their region. We also have here Rise of Indigenismo, a movement dedicated to representing indigenous culture and the injustices that such communities were undergoing. So when we say Rise of Indigenismo, it is mainly the injustice and the emancipation of previously exploited indigenous people, which they integrated to the state. Meaning to say, during this time is they push through the respect and the acknowledgement of the rights of indigenous society and their minority. So naanay integration sa mga minority o sa mga indigenous group. Gi-introduce na siya or Tawag ni acknowledge na ang ilahang presence within the state. Here we have the Argentine Jorge Luis Borges invented what was almost a new genre, which is the philosophical short story. The philosophical short story. Modernismo was an end of 19th and early 20th century Latin American literary movement, which was best exemplified by Ruben Dario. So when you say modernism, the father of modernism movement is Ruben Dario. He is known for his experiments on poetic rhythm, meter, and imagery. This period or era is known for free verse. Okay, Modernismo and boom precursor free verse, Ruben Dario. Okay, let's move forward. Fifth is avant-garde, also known as vanguardia, literally meaning forward. It is next artistic movement after Modernismo. So after Modernismo and so ito siya. So ito yung next boom precursor na ay avant-garde. Okay? It is instituted a radical search for new, daring, confrontational themes and shockingly novel forms. People and works have been experimental, and it is to push boundaries of what is accepted as the norm or status quo. Sige, when you say avant-garde, it is characterized by experimental, radical, or aesthetic innovation. In other words, pag may avant-garde, new, daring, confrontational themes, pushing or going beyond what is known. Example, ana, ma'am. So may mga common examples sa avant-garde, ma'am. So example, ana, is when a painter found or introduced a new way of painting style. Okay, pag naka-introduce ka og bag-o nga painting style, that's avant-garde. Going beyond what is known. Okay, introducing a new way to introduce a certain, what do you call this? Introduce a certain movement or style. Or simply a new way to express art. Okay? The works here were also experimental kasi bago pa man siya, no? So they try to put on which is better or kung unsa ang mas ma-inculcate nila or mas mahatag nila properly sa public. Ito muna avant-garde. When you say avant-garde, experimental. Next, we have here the boom. Increasing economic prosperity which gave rise to a new literary boom. It was a period of literary flourishing in the 1960s and 70s that brought much of the area's literature to an international audience. Famous boom authors include Julius Cortázar, Carlo Fuentes, Octavio Paz, Mario Vargas Llosa, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Okay, when you say the boom, it is a literary movement that allows works of Latin American young novelists to be known internationally. Okay, because the economy in these areas were gradually increasing, so nag-give rise siya to a new literary boom, which also allows the works of Latin American young novelists to be known globally. So it tackles mainly developmentalism, political construction, the increase in middle class. These all contributed to the rise of this period. Okay. Boom writers ventured outside traditional narrative structures, embracing non-linearity and experimental narration. Here, Emer Rodriguez Monigal published his influential Latin American literature monthly Mundo Nuevo, excerpts of unreleased novels from the new writers such as Guillermo Cabrera Infante or Severo Sarduy, including 2 chapters of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Años de Soledad or 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which circulates on a multi-generational story of a family. So kanang 100 Años de Soledad or 100 Years of Solitude, it was a novel crafted by Gabriel Garcia Marquez with dagan kaayo siya ng mga chapters, no, but in Mundo Nuevo by Emer Rodriguez Monigal, gi-feature niya dito ang duha ka chapter lang diri sa 100 Years of Solitude ni Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this is actually a really good, do you call this? It's a really a good novel, gid kayo siya, because it tackles about family, it tackles about the familial love, and everything that involves around it. The story is really good. It also led to the association of Latin American literature with magic realism. Sige, later on, we will try to examine unsa ng magic realism and why is it integrated sa Latin American literature or ngano nahimo siya ang heart sa Latin American literature. Okay, next we have here post boom and contemporary literature. It is sometimes characterized by a tendency towards irony and towards the use of popular genre. Some writers felt the success of the boom to be a burden and spiritedly denounced the caricature that reduces Latin American literature to magical realism. Contemporary literature in the region is vibrant and varied, ranging from the best-selling Paulo Coelho and Isabel Allende to the more avant-garde and critically acclaimed work of writers such as Demiela Elite and Gianni Braschi. Sige. I think, are you familiar with Paulo Coelho? One of his famous work is The Alchemist, which is an example of magical realism or magic realism. Sige, when post-boom and contemporary literature, mas na-establish ang connection between magical realism and Latin American literature. Mas na-inculcate siya sa Latin American literature. So later on, we'll find out unsa gid ng magical realism and how does it affect the development of Latin American literature in general. Okay, here we have now the themes in Latin American literature. First, we have the fantastic. Sige, unsa man na siyang the fantastic, ma'am? It is an odd, remarkable or bizarre, grotesque, and highly unbelievable or unrealistic events which occurs in fiction. The fantastic tests and often bends the limits of reality. Authors most often associated with the fantastic are Borges and Cortázar. Okay, when you say fantastic, odd, remarkable, bizarre, meaning unrealistic and unbelievable. Okay, again, when you say fantastic, fantasy, fantastic, fantasy, unrealistic, unbelievable. Okay? Next, we have here magical realism. Ayan. So, kanina, from the beginning or from the introduction that we have or the overview, na-mention dito unsa ang magic realism. And then in the midst and at the end of our discussion with the periods, mas na-emphasize dito unsa ang connection sa magical realism. And now, let's find out what is magical realism. Yan siya. When magical or supernatural elements are introduced into an otherwise realistic fictional setting, magical realism will depict believable settings, characters, and circumstances, but the supernatural or magical is incorporated into the fiction. Carpentier coined the term L'Oreal Maravilloso. Authors associated with magical realism include Garcia Marquez, Carpentier, and Esquivel, especially like Water for Chocolate. Okay, it's a type of a novel. So when you say magical realism, it is an inclusion of magic to reality. Okay? So mag-infuse ka og fantasy or magical elements or mythical elements sa reality. Your settings, however, is realistic. Your characters are realistic, but there were certain events which gi-introduce nimo or gisudlan nimo og fantasy. Okay? So ma'am, kung mo na siya ang definition po sa magical realism, what's the difference po nila ma'am sa fantasy? Okay? Again, when you say magical realism, you situate the reader into a realistic world but infuses it with a tinge of fantasy. While kung mayon ka og fantasy solely, unreal ang world unreal pod ang mga characters. Sige, ma'am. Example daw, ma'am, kay medyo naglibog pa mi kung unsa ang magical realism, ma'am. Sige. Kung mayon ka og kuan, fantasy. Example ana is Alice in Wonderland. Okay, that's a fantasy kasi si Alice is dili man siya realistic na character as well as ang mga events dito kay dili man siya real. Dili po realistic ang setting kay naa siya sa Wonderland. Okay? So that's an example of fantasy. Another one, what about J.K. Tolkien's The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings? Okay? Those are example of fantasy kasi dili man real characters or real setting ang involves the story itself. Okay, those are fantasy. But when you say magical realism, like what I said earlier or I mentioned earlier, one great example is Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Okay? Asa man dito ma'am ang magical realism ma'am sa The Alchemist ma'am nga puros man to realistic na mga events. Yes, it's magical realism because it involves real settings with believable settings, real characters and circumstances. However, dito na sulod ang magical realism sa part nga during the journey, there were omens, there were alchemy, and there were different communication that was used during the journey by the character. Okay? So, you see, ang setting is believable, na ang mga characters is believable, ang experiences is believable, but during the process or during the plot of the story, slowly or little na ay mga magic or na ay mga fantasy na na-inculcate dito or na ay magic na nabutang sa story itself. Okay? Next we have here social realism. These are dark and often depressing depictions of life in Latin America. Sometimes the literature reflects the violent history of the region, which is known as torrents of blood. Authors associated with social realism are Novas, Calvo, Rolfo, and Arias. Okay, when you say your social realism, the depiction of life among workers and poor people. It shows how one's life that exposes sorry for that. It shows how one's life that exposes human flaws. Okay, you expose the suffering, the hunger, all the realities experienced by men in this unfair world. Okay, muna siya ang social realism. Social realism, what is real? What the society what the society experienced in reality. I'm sorry. What the society experienced in reality. That is social realism. Next we have here female discourse. Fiction that makes its main theme gender role as it critiques Marianismo and Machismo in Latin American society. Authors associated with female discourse or feminist themes include Allende, Castellanos, and Fierre. So, pag mayong kag female discourse ay naglibog-libog ka imukhang self, it is women independence and feminism. Okay, women empowerment na siya. Girl power. Kung mayong kag female discourse, girl power. Okay? Okay. So, balik sa tanong. Unsa galito pag moingon gani ko o girl power, women empowerment, that is female discourse. Okay, pag moingon ta o what the society experience in reality, that is social realism. Okay, when we say inclusion of magic to reality, that is magical realism. So when we say purely unreal world, unreal setting, unreal characters, purely that is fantastica. Okay. Now let's move forward to the famous writers in Latin American literature. We have here first si Jorge Luis Borges. Jorge Luis Borges. May ang pag-pronounce sa iyang name. Una si Jorge Luis Borges. The most eminent Latin American author of any century, because to read him is to activate an awareness of literature in which he has gone farther than anybody else. Borges' work is aesthetic. This means he writes with the intention of contributing to the world of literature. As such, his fiction can be viewed as art for art's sake, literally means aesthetic. He was credited for developing and advancing the fantastic style in the region. His short stories frequently present his readers with a dizzying array of libraries, labyrinths, and mirrors. So, isa sa pinakaganahan na what do you call this quote given by Jorge Luis Borges is that plant your own garden and decorate your own soul instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers. Sabi ni Jorge Luis Borges. So pag mayon Jorge Luis Borges, activate an awareness of literature, art for art's sake. Okay, art for art's sake. That is Jorge Luis Borges. Next, we have here Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a Colombian novelist that's perhaps the most prominent author to emerge from Latin America in 20th century. He was the author of the Cien Años de Soledad, which is also known as 100 years or translated as 100 years of solitude. So ang 100 years of solitude, like I have stated earlier, it centers on the story of a certain family. Okay, the background of that certain family. It tackles about different social issues experienced by a family. This most important work, which he have crafted, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982. Magical realist world blends beautifully with the magical quotidian, ice and magnets with everyday magic, the divine ascensions, and raining flowers. His novels were technically filled with enchanting events and characters with varying love and madness, war, it talks about politics, the dreams, and death. So muna si Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Then we have here Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude, and won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982. Then we have, that is Pablo Neruda, a Chilean. He is the greatest poet of the 20th century in any language. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971, an outspoken voice in Latin American world politics, a move which allowed him in some ways to alienate everyone. His poetry is famously romantic and erotic, sometimes importing sensuality to the most quotidian objects, as seen in works like Ode to the Apple or 100 Love Sonnets. Neruda's politics made him an exile from his native Chile and he encountered his dramatic escape in his novel literature. He was exiled due to his political ideology. He is also very famous with his love poems. Okay, one love poem here I have about Pablo Neruda is "If You Forget Me." Ayan siya. This one's one of my favorite craft ni Pablo Neruda. I want you to know one thing. You know how this is. If I look at the crystal moon, at the red branch of the slow autumn at my window, if I touch near the fire the impalpable ash or the wrinkled body of the log, everything carries me to you, as if everything that exists, aromas, light, metals, were little boats that sail toward those isles of yours that wait for me. Well, now, if little by little you stop loving me, I shall stop loving you little by little. If suddenly you forget me, do not look for me, for I shall already have forgotten you. If you think it long and mad, the wind of banners that passes through my life, and you decide to leave me at the shore of the heart where I have roots, remember that on that day, at that hour, I shall lift my arms and my roots will set off to seek another land. But if each day, each hour, you feel that you are destined for me with implacable sweetness, if each day a flower climbs up to your lips to seek me, oh my love, my own, in me all that fire is repeated, in me nothing is extinguished or forgotten. My love feeds on your love, beloved, and as long as you live, it will be in your arms without leaving mine. Okay. Pablo Neruda's If You Forget Me simply taught us about a selfless and pure love for another. Okay. The overall or the entirety of this poem gives us a situation where a boy provides a girl with only two choices. That is, forget me or come to me. Ayan siya. See, imagine the power, the magic of literature. It can be expressed in any forms, in any ways possible. However, the feelings, the experiences, the heart is always there. It can be free verse, it can be may rhythm ba yan siya, may meter ba yan siya, whatever the form is, as long as you can feel it by heart, okay, that's how significant literature is in everyday's life. If you're not able to express it orally, if you can't express it with just simple words, if you're good at expressing it with these words, with poetry, with poems, express it as much as you can. Okay? Muna siya ang power sa literature. And that's solely the purpose of literature, to share something to other people, to share a part of you to other people. Ayan siya. So, teacher, sige, tabi. Okay, let's move forward to our last famous author with this literary work. We have here Octavio Paz. He's a Mexican writer and a poet. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1990, and he is the author of The Labyrinth of Solitude. His poetry often explores solitude and sensuality as well as language. I'm sorry for that. Language and silence. So the totality of his works talks about Mexican history and its culture, the corruption that has happened in the region, the political dispute, and the political power. So it also talks about the solitude or the remoteness and isolation. So again, Octavio Paz, solitude, sensuality, language, and silence. Okay. Unsa ito pag moingon ta og Pablo Neruda, that is 100 Love Sonnets, talks about unsa man siya? Romantic and erotic, known for his 100 love sonnets. So pag moingon ta again og Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude, known for his magical, quotidian, and everyday magic at divine assertion and raining flowers. Okay, example atong kay kay katong 100 Years of Solitude, katong about sa family. Okay, talks about love, war, politics, dreams, and death. Okay, now let's move forward to okay, for your activity, here's the instruction, your general instruction. Answer the 10-item quiz on Google form provided on your group chat. The quiz will do on April 20, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. So this is only a recorded video of our supposed discussion kung face-to-face sana yung kung sana nag-online class tayo, but unfortunately, naabtan man taog, naabtan taog Holy Week. So, i-recorded video na lang nato. However, I'll be extending the deadline. That will be on April 20, 2022. So, when this recorded video reached you probably on Monday, you kindly answer the 10-item quiz that will be given on your group chat. And then, for your asynchronous activity, ayan, dili kayo matens, guys. Gamay ra kayo ni siya. For your general instruction, create a reflection paper based on the literary work Cien Sonetos de Amor by Pablo Neruda. The reflection paper should answer the question, what strikes you most in Sonnet 17 and why? Okay, you create a reflection paper, read Cien Sonetos de Amor 17 by Pablo Neruda, and then you reflect based on the question, what strikes you most in Sonnet 17 and why? The individual output must present the author's in-depth reflection of the given question. It must have a minimum of 500 words. Again, minimum of 500 words with three paragraphs, having 3 to 5 sentences each paragraph. Okay, minimum of 500 words, 3 paragraphs having 3 to 5 sentences each paragraph. A Google Drive link shall be provided where you will upload your outputs in PDF format. This task will do on, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to edit this one. That's not supposed to be April 28th, but May 2, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Okay? May 2, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Wait, I'll be showing you an example of the PDF format for your asynchronous activity. Here. So I will be sending this PDF file to the Google Drive form as well as the recorded video of this discussion. Okay. I hope it settles everything. Then although this is a recorded video, no, which sadly mas gapunta to if I get to determine or to reflect with your chats or your um experiences as well or your point of views, no. So but I do hope that this recorded video will give you sufficient information or data or anything that will help you learn during this lesson. Okay, should you have any more questions, kindly dili maulaw o ask the questions sa inyong group chat. Then I will relay immediately as much as I can sa inyong mga messages or queries. Okay, goodbye everyone and good day. Have a good day ahead.